And then you're in your 30s and you want to get pregnant and you realize you don't know the half of it. Sure, for some people, they have sex, they don't even look at the calendar, they get pregnant, and that's their journey. That was not our journey. Before we dive into this episode, I want to give you a heads up that we will be talking about some deeply personal and sensitive topics, including miscarriage, infant loss, pregnancy termination, depression, and anxiety. These are heavy subjects, and it's okay if you're not in a place where you're ready to hear about them right now. Your well-being is so important, and if this feels like too much for you today, maybe it's not the right time to listen. Please take care of yourself and come back whenever you feel ready. Hello, welcome. I am so glad you are here. This is the very first episode of It's Getting Mom in Here. I'm Kori, your host, and I'm going to be sharing this first season, my journey of becoming a mother, and I'm going to be sharing what happened with getting pregnant, the diagnosis of my son being very ill, and ultimately losing him. So let's just jump right into it. I think I'd like to start with just sharing a little bit about me. So I was in my 30s. I'm still in my 30s, but I was in my early 30s when all of this was going down. The other key character in this story is my husband, Taylor. He was also in his early 30s. Why I'm sharing our age is because I think that being in your 30s puts this pressure to start having kids and to have kids quickly. I think that, especially as a woman, when you hit your 30s, I feel like your ovaries send sort of alarm saying, hello, are you going to have babies? So I just think that's important to understand. At least for myself, that was the mindset that I had, was being in my 30s, ready to have kids. Okay, so that's really the foundation of what I think you need to know, and let's just jump right into it. So my husband and I, we were engaged in 2019 and we're planning a wedding for 2020. We were part of that group of people that were just blissfully unaware that the world was going to go into an upheaval and a global pandemic was just around the corners. We ultimately decided that we would still get married, and we opted for fall 2020, this beautiful 25-person wedding. We actually had it at the location that we had really wanted to have our wedding at. So that was pretty great. It didn't feel like things were completely taken away from us. So we got married fall 2020. And you know the old saying, first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes everyone asking you when you're going to have a baby. So we knew, now being in our 30s, that we were feeling that itch. We weren't quite ready, but we knew that we felt ready to at least to have that conversation of actually planning. We always knew that we wanted to have kids. It was just figuring out when. And there's a lot of different factors that I think you need to consider. Things like job stability, house stability, just relationship stability, just all of those things play a role in it. So we were having those discussions and we were feeling like we were in a good place. I actually had just gotten a full-time permanent position at my work. I was no longer working part-time, casual, crazy hours, frontline healthcare worker. We started having discussions and thinking that we would feel ready to have kids in 2022. So we were hopeful that getting married, we would be able to ride out this COVID wave and maybe get married and be able to travel a little bit before we had kids, not realizing that COVID was going to go on for years. We kind of spent that first year, blissful marriage, in our first home together, just hanging out with our two cats. That was great. And then we're feeling like we were ready to start trying. So let me catch you up on where we're at in this timeline now. So we are now in spring of 2021, and we were just blissfully unaware of the journey that was to come in terms of trying to grow our family. That spring and summer, we started to say, okay, I think it's time that we do that thing that adults do, to make a baby. I think we're feeling ready. And this is funny for me because I know that my mom and dad are going to be listening to this. So I don't even want to admit at this point, even though they know I got pregnant. They know how that happens, but I'm still like, am I allowed to say it if my mom is listening? So we were going to do that thing. And I think about it now that I didn't know my body very well when it was time for us to start trying. I knew that I had a fairly regular cycle. I actually had had an IUD for quite a long time where I didn't have my period, but my period came back very quickly after taking out the IUD. And I was back on like a perfect 27, 28-day cycle. So I was very lucky that way. But that's really all that I knew about my body and how my cycle worked. It's interesting to think about I'm going to take us on a little, side story here. I grew up going to a Catholic elementary school and a public high school. So in elementary school, you're taught, don't have sex. Just don't do it. Immaculate conception is the only way. That's it. Here are all the ways to not have sex. And then in public school, you're taught, okay, yes, you can have sex, but here's how to not get pregnant. Here's how to use a condom. Here's how to use a dental dam. Here's how to use spermicide. Just all those things. Do not get pregnant. And then you're in your 30s and you want to get pregnant and you realize you don't know the half of it. Sure, for some people, they have sex. They don't even look at the calendar. They get pregnant and that's their journey. That was not our journey. I'm just going to preface this and say it only took us 4 months to get pregnant. I recognize that that is not very long to try. And I just want to be very upfront that I do know that there are many other journeys that are much longer than mine. But all I know is mine. So I'm going to share how I was feeling in those moments of my journey. So back to it. Spring 2021, we're ready to start trying. We try that first month, and the naive foolishness, young, unassuming, whatever you want to call it. We looked at a calendar, counted 14 days from my last period, put an X on the calendar and said, that's the day it all goes down, and la-di-da, we'll have made a baby. Spoiler alert, that is not what happened. So we timed it. We tried that first month, and I was intently Googling all the symptoms that you might experience and excited about it, and waiting that 2-week wait, as they call it, those 14 days after ovulation, waiting until it was okay to take a pregnancy test. And I honestly don't even remember if I took a test or if I just got my period, but I found out that I was not pregnant that month, and I was devastated. And I think that if you want to get pregnant, if you are trying to get pregnant, every month that you either get your period, you wipe and you see blood, you don't see that second line, you don't see the positive pregnancy test, regardless of how long you've been trying, it sucks. It is so upsetting. As soon as you decide you want to try, you start making up this whole life. You're like, oh, look at the calendar. If we have sex this month, then we'll have a baby in this month. Oh, how beautiful. It'd be a summer baby or it'd be a spring baby, all those things. So when you realize that month you're not pregnant, it sucks. That was my first experience with that feeling, and I was devastated. So as one does, I took to the internet And I happened upon these forums. So there are forums that exist on the internet where people will share their experiences with trying to conceive. And these forums were like a whole other world with their own language. So trying to conceive is TTC. Then you've got BFP and BFN for big fat positive, big fat negative. Sprinkling angel or baby dust. Angel dust is a drug, not sprinkling that. Sprinkling baby dust on somebody to wish them well. And Aunt Flo, I think we can guess what that one is. So just different things like that. Your DPO, that was a really popular one, days past ovulation, which is a very important one when you're sharing your story in these forums. So you would see a lot of people that were posting things like, I'm 17 DPO and still getting a negative test. Is there anyone out there who got a positive at this point? And so like at that point, like realistically, this person probably is not pregnant, but they're just holding on to whatever grain of hope they can. And they just want to hear that somebody else had this happen to them and it was okay. They got pregnant. I think that it can be a really toxic space to be in. I want to say delusional, but I don't love that word in this context. I think it can be a dangerous space because then somebody would always post, yeah, I was 20 days late and then still got pregnant. And it's like, well, the reality is that person probably had a wonky cycle and they didn't actually ovulate at that time. There's other reasons, and everyone's body is so unique that just because you hear someone else had it happen successfully doesn't mean it's going to happen to you. And I think I got sucked into it. I got sucked into really looking at all the symptoms, and the really like unfair thing about PMS and period symptoms are that they are almost exactly the same as the symptoms you get in early pregnancy. So things like fatigue, headache, cramping, really light bleeding, feeling moody, all those things happen for both. So it's really unfair that those days leading up to when you can test, you'll pick apart all these symptoms, and it could really go either way. And in these posts, people would post photos of a pregnancy test and share with the group asking, do you think this is positive? And it's like, you have to like squint and like turn upside down and do a headstand and up the contrast, invert the colors, and like maybe you see something of a line, but it's probably just the indentation mark of the pregnancy test. And you just are craving for somebody to tell you, I see that line. I think you might be pregnant. Hold on to that hope until you see your period. Hold on to hope. Then not to mention the whole world of pregnancy tests. So I started just using Amazon brand and like dollar store brand because I hated the fact that those digital tests and the more expensive one, the first response tests, all of those say, find out 6 days sooner. And what they don't tell you is 6 days sooner actually means 5 days sooner because they're counting the day after your period. So they're doing some sort of math just to make it sound like you can test even sooner. And then the accuracy at 6 days sooner or 5 days before your whatever, the accuracy is not great. So if you test 5 days before your period with a first response test and you get a negative, there is a 25% chance that that test is inaccurate. You get the point. If you test early, the test results could be inaccurate or they could be accurate. So really, those are only beneficial. If you are pregnant, you might find out earlier. But if it is negative, you are going to hold on to hope and say, I tested too early. It was this realization for me that, oh my God, these companies are preying on women desperately wanting to be pregnant. And those tests are like $15 to $20 each. They are so expensive. So I was deep into these forums, and I can remember laying in bed so many nights, just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, looking at these different posts, trying to find people who had my same symptoms and got pregnant and all these tips for what you should eat if you're trying to get pregnant, what you shouldn't eat, and things like don't drink 2 weeks before you are trying to get pregnant, you're ovulating, and don't drink 2 weeks after you've had sex, which is just a whole month. So just don't drink ever. Exercise more, exercise less. Should you sit with your legs up for 20 minutes after? Like all of these things, all these old wives' tales, all these things that people say it's tried and true. I was willing to try anything. And this was really just after that like first month, maybe second month that I was really invested in these forums. So we tried that second month, we didn't get pregnant. We tried that third month, we didn't get pregnant. And by that fourth month, I found out I was pregnant. So the morning that I took a test, I saw a very, very faint line. And I probably tested maybe like a day or so earlier than you're supposed to test. And that's a whole other thing, that you're testing too early. And then if it's negative, you tell yourself, well, oh, it's just because it's too early. It's chaotic in the brain of somebody trying to conceive. So I did get a very faint line. And honestly, I didn't believe it. I took the test and disposed of it and decided not to tell Taylor that day, which anyone who knows me, it's just wild. I don't know how I didn't tell him that I had tested positive, because if you know me, I am the kind of person that tells everyone everything all of the time. I am a chatty person, a chatterbox, if you will. And that's the reason why I have a podcast where it's just me talking. So I didn't tell him. And I waited until that next day. I wanted to test again. So we woke up in the morning, we're getting ready for work. And I said, I think I might be pregnant. I think we need to take a pregnancy test. So we went to the bathroom. It was very romantic. I collected my urine in a cup and we put the test in. We set it aside and we walked away for that 3 minutes or however long you're supposed to wait. And we walked back into the bathroom. We looked at the test and sure enough, there were 2 lines. And that moment, you are just immediately filled with joy, excitement, fear, overwhelm. You start planning your next 10 Christmases and family vacations. Just your mind starts racing with all of these things that you're going to be a mom, you're going to be a dad, you're going to be a parent. It's just right away, all your hopes and dreams start building for this child. So now Taylor knew. And it was time to share or not share with the rest of our family. We had to decide if we wanted to tell everyone else, how we wanted to tell them. So at the time, we were actually in the midst of selling our home. That same week we found out we were pregnant, we had bought a new house. We found out an offer was accepted, and we had 1 week to put our house on the market. The market was crazy at this point in time. It was when houses were selling like hotcakes. And we had a really tight closing date. We had to get our house on the market ASAP. I was exhausted. I think I was about 5 weeks pregnant at this point, and all that I had for energy was enough to go to work, come home, take a nap. And it was starting to be a little troublesome when we had my brother-in-law at our house helping us frantically install backsplash in our kitchen. And I'm like, hey, thanks for helping. I'm going to go have a nap. And he was like, okay, great about it. I guess Kori's really tired lately. That was just like a really busy time. It was really hard when those symptoms started happening. So our house is ready to get listed and start having showings. And we knew it was going to be chaotic with lots of viewings and people in and out. And our house was immaculately clean and staged. So we figured that it was just better to move in with my parents for that time so that every time we wanted to make toast, we didn't have to do a deep clean of the kitchen. This is still in the heavy times of COVID, where COVID was still very scary, especially for people 60 and up, which my parents are. I wasn't feeling great, but I knew why. I knew it was not COVID, but they wouldn't know that. And it felt like it would be unfair for me to stay at their house for like a week, feeling like garbage and not share with them why. I didn't want them to think, could you have COVID? Why aren't you testing for COVID? You need to keep your distance from us. You need to wear a mask in the house. And I, wanted to assure them that this was not something that they would catch. So that was one part of it. And then the other side is that my family loves to have shots of Crown Royal for any occasion. I knew that as soon as we went over, my dad would offer me, in true dad fashion, a shot and a beer. And I don't know that ever in my life I have said no to that offer from my dad. And it would be suspicious if after a couple days he offered and I kept saying no for no good reason. Not that there's like this weird pressure to drink, but I just knew the gears would start turning and they might start to figure it out. And I didn't want them to have that suspicion. I really wanted it to be a surprise when I told them. So we opted to give them a card that was a thank you card for all the help with getting our house ready and letting us stay with them. I think we put in the card, as a thank you, here's another grandchild or something along those lines. It was like not overly creative or witty, but we're like standing there like filming them while they're opening this card. They're like already getting suspicious that this is like weird behavior. My parents are seasoned grandparents. They had already had 5 other grandchildren, but they were so excited that their third daughter was going to have her first. They were going to be grandparents again. They were so excited. We were excited to share it with them. I think then my dad offered Taylor a shot and a beer, and I had like a shot of ginger ale or something. This was probably earlier than I think we would have told them otherwise. I think that before everything happened, I would have been inclined to wait until we were past that first trimester where you're safe. You made it past the first trimester. Everything's good, which we learned is not the case. But I think I would have had that mentality. In hindsight, I'm really glad that they knew early. It was really fun to have them in the loop. So once we told my parents, we knew we had to tell Taylor's parents very, very soon. We couldn't, it would be unfair to leave too much of a gap. So the next day we went to their house and very similar. We gave them a card thanking them. And this was going to be my in-law's first grandchild. I feel like my mother-in-law was just like put on this earth to be a grandmother. Like you knew she was just going to be so, so excited. And sure enough, we gave them the card. She starts like jumping up and down. She's crying. And again, we're like filming. And my father-in-law is taking a little bit of time to like catch up with what's happening. And it was just so sweet. It was just a perfect moment of sharing in this like beautiful, blissful excitement. And those videos we have, I can't watch them. I don't know where they exist anymore in our, cloud of data and video storage. I don't know that I ever can go back and watch those videos because those are different people. And that excitement in this story is eventually ripped away from us. And it's so, you feel this feeling of foolishness for being so excited. And it's really hard to watch those raw joy moments. But where we are at in the story, it was joy. It was so, so much joy, so much excitement, so much planning. Now that we had shared with the parents, we slowly started telling our siblings. So I have 2 older sisters. Taylor has an older brother. We shared with them. Everyone is so excited. And then it was time to find a healthcare professional. That was the next person we needed to tell. And we had no idea how to do that. I could have just called my doctor and asked, but everything was overwhelming. So we reached out to Taylor's cousin. Her name is Laura. She is a midwife. She is like top-notch, top of the line midwife. So we called her. She was over the moon. I think she was suspecting it. I think we like FaceTimed her. So she was like, this is odd. They don't just FaceTime for no good reason. She suspected, and she was over the moon. She was so happy that she got to be part of that like in circle of people that we were sharing this with so early. We asked her if she would be willing to be our midwife. She said she needed a little bit of time to think about it. We completely understood that offering care like this for family members that you're quite close with can be tricky. She took a little bit of time, and that gave us some time to think as well. And she came back to us and said, I don't think that I am the right person to be your midwife. And we absolutely respected that. And honestly, I had come to that same conclusion as well at that point. And I think I just needed her to say that. She, in this story, was there for us in the way that she needed to be, the way that we needed her to be there for us. And had she been our midwife, she wouldn't have been able to be cousin Laura. She wouldn't have been able to be that person for us. She referred us to a midwifery clinic in the city where she knew some of the people. We said, okay, we trust you. We trust who you would refer us to. We reached out to that clinic, and just like that, we had a midwife. The process was beginning. So I will leave it there for today's episode. Come back here for episode 2, where we will continue to talk about what happened next and the medical side of everything, and get really into some of the I don't want to call it juicy, but it does get juicy. It does get a little wild. So I hope that you will come back and listen to more. And if you like this podcast, please share it with a friend. This is the best way for podcasts to get into the ears of people who want to listen to them. I hope that you enjoyed this time with me. We will see you next time.